In the philosophy of Niccolò Machiavelli, power is not merely an external force. It is the invisible current that dictates all human relationships, whether between rulers and subjects, generals and soldiers, or lovers bound by desire. Every bond is built upon a silent hierarchy of control. The one who commands emotional leverage dominates, while the one who submits, through sentiment, becomes the servant of his own heart. Machiavelli would argue that love, though intoxicating, is often the most cunning disguise through which power is stolen. The principle of power imbalance governs the unseen dynamics between men and women. In every interaction, one person leads, and the other follows. This balance is not fixed. It shifts subtly through words, reactions, and boundaries. The man who allows his emotions to rule him relinquishes control. The man who governs his emotions holds dominion over the relationship. For Machiavelli, control is not cruelty. It is the foundation of order. Without it, chaos replaces respect, and affection mutates into contempt. When a woman begins to manipulate a man's emotions through guilt, withdrawal, or calculated indifference, she tests not his patience, but his authority. She seeks to learn whether his self-control is stronger than her emotional influence. Each moment of hesitation, each desperate attempt to please or justify, is a silent surrender of command. Machiavelli would warn that once a ruler allows others to dictate his actions through emotion, he ceases to rule. In the realm of love, as in politics, the loss of respect always begins with the loss of control. A Machiavellian man must understand that tolerance is not virtue when it erodes power. Many men believe that patience and forgiveness maintain peace, but in truth, unchecked tolerance invites rebellion. When a woman realizes that her emotional games have no consequence, she learns that your discipline is negotiable. And when discipline fades, respect dies. Machiavelli's wisdom insists that fear and love must coexist. Never let one destroy the other. A woman must feel affection, yes, she must also feel the weight of consequence. Without it, she grows careless, and the relationship becomes a field of manipulation. Machiavelli observed that men of emotion often lose to those of calculation. The heart, he wrote, is easily deceived when blinded by desire. The same applies to relationships. When a man prioritizes affection over authority, he becomes predictable. And predictability is the death of power. To prevent this, one must learn to act, not react. The moment you are drawn into emotional chaos, you've already conceded control. The prince, in love or in war, must remain unmoved by provocation. He must observe like a strategist, not suffer like a victim. In a world governed by appearances, the balance of power is maintained through perception. A man who commands respect does not need to shout, argue, or justify. His silence speaks for him. When a woman senses his strength, she calibrates her behavior accordingly. When she senses weakness, she presses further until the man bends or breaks. The Machiavellian solution is to ensure that your composure remains unshaken. You cannot control others, you can control what they believe you are capable of. Authority, after all, is often an illusion sustained by consistency. Power imbalance also manifests through dependence. The man who depends emotionally on a woman's validation has already surrendered his throne. Machiavelli would note that dependency breeds manipulation, for the dependent man fears loss more than he values dignity. He compromises his standards, accepts disrespect, and rationalizes mistreatment in the name of love. But love that demands submission is not love. It is conquest. The only way to restore balance is through self-sufficiency, to be a man who desires but does not need, who gives affection but never at the cost of his sovereignty. Machiavelli's teachings suggest that every relationship requires structure, and structure is born from hierarchy. Equality in affection may exist, but equality in power never does. Someone always sets the emotional tone. Someone always dictates the rhythm of connection. The wise man ensures that he is the one who leads that rhythm. He rewards respect, not manipulation. He offers love, but never as a plea. He forgives, but never forgets patterns. In doing so, he preserves the sacred balance between warmth and authority, the same balance that holds kingdoms together. The principle of power imbalance is not about domination, it is about discipline. It is the understanding that emotion, when left unchecked, breeds weakness, and weakness invites exploitation. Machiavelli's wisdom teaches that power must remain in your hands, not through aggression, but through emotional mastery. A man who controls himself cannot be controlled by others. And when he refuses to tolerate behaviors that disrupt his inner order, he ensures that the power within the relationship remains where it belongs. Firmly in his command, Machiavelli understood that human nature rarely reveals itself honestly. He wrote that men in general judge more by the eye than by the hand, meaning people believe what they see, not what they should discern. In matters of power and love, this principle becomes even more treacherous, for the face of deception often wears a mask of virtue. The most dangerous manipulations are not loud, aggressive, or overtly cruel. They are soft, disguised as affection, vulnerability, or sorrow. The mask of innocence is one of the most subtle yet destructive forces a man will ever encounter, for it conceals the will to control behind a performance of purity. In the eyes of Machiavelli, appearances govern perception, and perception governs power. A woman who understands this truth instinctively wields it as her weapon. She learns early that tears can silence confrontation, that fragility can disarm suspicion, and that kindness, when selectively applied, can bind a man tighter than chains. Through gentle tones and careful gestures, she paints herself as incapable of wrongdoing. But behind that image may lie calculation, a silent assessment of what emotional tools will bend a man's will most effectively. The nod of a man takes her words as truth. The wise man watches her patterns. The mask of innocence is powerful because it appeals to a man's instinct to protect, not to question. Machiavelli observed that the masses prefer the appearance of virtue over virtue itself, because it is comforting to believe in goodness. In love, the same illusion occurs. A man wants to believe that her affection is pure, that her kindness is unconditional, that her emotions are sincere. Yet belief without examination is the first step toward manipulation. A Machiavellian man must remember that the more innocent a mask appears, the more it hides. True virtue does not need to prove itself through constant display. It reveals itself through consistency, even when unseen. When a woman commits an act that disrupts harmony, be it deceit, disrespect, or subtle disloyalty, she often cloaks it in justifications that appeal to emotion. She may cry, speak of pain, or insist that her actions were misunderstood. She may even shift blame skillfully, transforming herself from the cause of conflict into the victim of misunderstanding. This is not mere coincidence, it is strategy. Machiavelli would call it the art of deception by necessity. For in every court, who cannot fight through strength learn to fight through sentiment. The man who allows sympathy to override discernment becomes enslaved by his own empathy. The mask of innocence thrives in uncertainty, feeds on a man's doubt, his fear of appearing harsh, unloving, or cruel. Each time he ignores manipulation in the name of kindness, he reinforces her control. Machiavelli warned rulers never to let compassion cloud judgment. Compassion without discipline is weakness disguised as morality. A man who sees through the mask must not confront with anger, but with silence and distance, for confrontation often provides the manipulator more ground to twist the narrative. Observation and withdrawal reveal truth far better than argument. Deception wrapped in innocence often follows a pattern of small transgressions. It begins subtly, a white lie, a small omission, a gentle twist of reality. The man who forgives without consequence teaches that deceit is tolerable. Over time, her tactics evolve. She learns exactly how far she can go while maintaining her image of purity. Machiavelli would recognize this as the slow corrosion of authority, the way a ruler's influence is undermined not by rebellion, but by flattery. For every lie excused, every manipulation justified, the ruler loses a fraction of his respect until his authority collapses quietly, without battle. The mask of innocence is also a mirror of male weakness. It thrives where logic yields to emotion. The man who seeks peace at any cost, who fears loneliness more than betrayal, becomes the perfect subject of such manipulation. Machiavelli taught that fear is a more reliable motivator than love, but a man ruled by fear of loss will confuse tolerance with virtue. He will praise himself for understanding her, for forgiving her, for being the bigger person, when in truth, he has been conquered by his own longing to preserve affection. The mask stays on because he refuses to see what lies beneath it. To understand the mask of innocence is not to grow cynical, but strategic. It means recognizing that not all displays of tenderness are genuine, that not every apology is repentance, and that charm, when weaponized, can erode judgment faster than aggression. Machiavelli wrote that a prince must appear merciful, faithful, humane, and upright, but be ready to act otherwise when necessity demands. The same law applies in relationships. A woman may appear kind, loving, or vulnerable. What she seeks beneath that appearance is the measure of your discernment. If she discovers that tears can sway you, she will use them. If she finds that vulnerability earns forgiveness, she will weaponize fragility. If she learns that guilt governs your reactions, she will build her power upon it. The mask of innocence, therefore, is not a singular act of deceit, but an ongoing theater of influence. It transforms emotion into leverage, confusion into obedience, and affection into dependency. It is the art of controlling without commanding, the elegance of ruling without force, the power of appearing powerless. And though it wears the face of gentleness, it speaks the language of control, hidden beneath the silence of a smile. In Machiavelli's philosophy, respect is the invisible crown that sustains all forms of authority. Without it, love becomes frail, loyalty becomes hollow, and order collapses into chaos. He wrote that it is better to be feared than loved, if one cannot be both, not because fear is cruelty, but because fear ensures that respect is maintained even when affection fades. In the realm of relationships, this principle translates with painful clarity. Once a woman stops respecting a man, no amount of love, charm, or kindness can restore what has been lost. Respect is not requested, it is commanded through strength, composure, and consistency. The erosion of respect does not occur in a single act, it begins subtly, like cracks spreading across marble. A dismissive tone here, a sarcastic remark there, a refusal to listen when you speak. Each small sign is a shift in the balance of power. In the beginning, many men overlook these gestures, mistaking them for mood or personality. But to Machiavelli, there are no small acts when it comes to power. Every act of disrespect tolerated becomes permission for the next one. What begins as minor defiance slowly evolves into indifference, and indifference is the death of reverence. Machiavelli understood that authority depends on perception as much as it does on strength. When a man permits a woman to treat him with disregard, he signals that his standards are flexible. She observes this and adjusts her behavior accordingly. The next time she interrupts, mocks, or challenges him, she does it with confidence, for she knows there will be no consequence. Respect is not lost when she acts. It is lost when he fails to respond. The ruler who does not punish disobedience invites rebellion. The man who tolerates disrespect invites its repetition. Discipline, therefore, is not cruelty but the preservation of order. In the psychology of attraction, women test men constantly, not always out of malice, but instinct. These tests are attempts to measure strength, emotional control, and self-worth. When a man bends under pressure, when he explains himself endlessly or seeks approval, he reveals that he fears losing her more than he values maintaining respect. Machiavelli would call this the fatal flaw of the ruler who wishes to be loved above all else. A leader who prioritizes affection over authority loses both. Similarly, a man who chases harmony at the cost of dignity invites domination disguised as partnership. The erosion of respect often hides behind modern ideals of equality and understanding, where men are told that emotional vulnerability and submission are acts of love. Yet Machiavelli's insight reminds us that power cannot coexist with submission. Equality in worth may exist, but equality in dominance cannot. Someone must lead. In a relationship, when the man relinquishes that role, when he allows disrespect to persist in the name of peace, the woman unconsciously assumes control. Her instincts shift. She no longer sees him as a leader, but as a subordinate to be guided or corrected. Attraction declines, resentment grows, and the emotional hierarchy reverses entirely. Disrespect also reveals itself through tone and attitude rather than words. When a woman begins to speak with impatience, sarcasm, or contempt, it is not random. It is a signal that she no longer fears the consequence of displeasing him. Machiavelli would warn that the subjects who mock their ruler are already plotting his downfall. In love, this downfall manifests as emotional withdrawal, diminished desire, and quiet disobedience. Once respect has eroded, affection remains only as habit, not as reverence. And habits, once broken, rarely mend. To prevent the erosion of respect, a man must embody what Machiavelli called vert, the strength of character that commands admiration. Vert is not arrogance or domination, It is the fusion of confidence, restraint, and decisiveness. It is the quality that makes others sense that boundaries exist even before they are spoken. A man who possesses vert never needs to demand respect. It is given freely because it is felt. Women, consciously or not, are drawn to men who carry this energy. It represents stability, security, and authority, the pillars upon which attraction naturally stands. When a man loses vert, when he becomes reactive, desperate, or overly accommodating, he loses the aura of control. The woman's behavior then shifts from respect to management. She begins to correct, guide, and test, believing she must do what he will not. This is how relationships decay from admiration into annoyance, from love into leadership reversal. Machiavelli would describe this as the collapse of the state from monarchy into anarchy. The ruler becomes irrelevant, and the governed rule themselves. The erosion of respect can also stem from inconsistency. When a man speaks of standards but does not enforce them, when he threatens consequences but delivers none, his words lose weight. Machiavelli warned rulers never to make threats they cannot fulfill, for empty words weaken authority faster than defeat. The same law applies here. A woman who sees that a man's boundaries are flexible learns that his strength is only theatrical. In her eyes, he becomes less of a man and more of a child pretending to hold power. Once this perception sets in, the dynamic is almost impossible to repair, for respect once withdrawn rarely returns. Respect, then, is not sustained through constant dominance, but through unwavering consistency. It is the quiet confidence in one's principles, the refusal to justify what needs no justification, the calm withdrawal when disrespect crosses the line. Machiavelli knew that power once surrendered is not easily regained. The man who understands this law guards his dignity as a ruler guards his throne, not through aggression, but through the quiet certainty that his worth is non-negotiable. Machiavelli taught that true mastery lies not in conquest alone, but in restraint, the ability to act decisively, then step away with precision when power is threatened. He believed that a ruler's strength is measured not by his temper, but by his timing. In relationships, the same truth holds. A man who cannot withdraw when disrespected, who cannot set boundaries and enforce them without apology, becomes a prisoner of his own attachment. The art of boundaries and withdrawal is therefore the essence of emotional strategy. It is how a man preserves both his dignity and his influence in the face of manipulation or chaos. To Machiavelli, every action must serve a purpose. He warned that excessive mercy, when unearned, invites defiance. The man who continuously forgives without consequence creates an empire of rebellion within his own household. Boundaries exist not to control others, but to define the limits of what will be tolerated. A man without boundaries is like a city without walls, open to every invasion, every attack, every form of disrespect. The one who loves without limits is easily ruled by the one who tests them. The woman who knows she can break your peace without repercussion will soon lose respect for your strength. And when respect fades, love follows quietly behind it. Machiavelli would insist that setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but of wisdom. The wise ruler rewards loyalty and punishes betrayal, not out of hatred, but to preserve order. Similarly, a man must make clear through action, not argument, that his standards are firm. When a woman crosses a line, he need not shout or explain. He simply removes his attention, his presence, his energy. Silence, in this sense, is not weakness but command. Withdrawal becomes a form of education. It teaches more effectively than confrontation because it denies what every manipulator craves: reaction. Withdrawal, to Machiavelli, is a calculated maneuver, not an emotional retreat. When the prince withdraws from a situation, he does so to regain advantage, not to flee. He does not abandon the battlefield, he changes the terrain. In love, withdrawal serves the same purpose. It forces reflection. It reminds the other person of your value by making your absence felt more than your presence taken for granted. The moment you argue to be respected, you have already lost respect, but the moment you disappear, you restore mystery, power, and consequence. Machiavelli understood that presence is only powerful when absence is feared. Many men struggle with this principle because they mistake boundaries for distance and withdrawal for punishment. But boundaries are not walls of separation. They are lines of identity. They declare, "This is who I am, and this is what I will not allow." Without them, a man dissolves into emotional chaos, constantly seeking peace through compromise until there is nothing left to defend. Machiavelli would remind such a man that peace without structure is an illusion. Just as a state cannot survive without law, a relationship cannot survive without discipline. Order requires firmness. Affection requires boundaries to thrive within. The art of withdrawal demands emotional control, for instinct pushes most men toward pursuit. When faced with disrespect or manipulation, they chase resolution, explanation, or apology. They argue, hoping to restore peace through dialogue. But Machiavelli would call this a fatal mistake. The more you explain, the more you reveal your dependency on approval. The man who cannot walk away exposes that his emotions govern him, not his reason. The prince, however, knows the power of silence. He does not justify, beg, or plead. He simply acts, and his actions redefine the relationship's reality without words. Boundaries also test not just others, but oneself. To hold them requires the discipline to endure discomfort, the loneliness of withdrawal, the silence of restraint, the patience of power. Machiavelli's ruler knew that fortitude often feels like isolation, but isolation is where clarity is reborn. When a man withdraws, he forces himself to see the truth stripped of emotion. He sees who reaches out, who reflects, and who continues in defiance. It is through distance that loyalty and intention reveal themselves. This is why withdrawal is not a reaction but a strategy, an active assessment that allows truth to surface naturally, without confrontation. In the dynamics between men and women, withdrawal often rebalances what words cannot. It reminds the woman that access to your attention is a privilege, not a right. It signals that affection is conditional upon respect. It teaches that connection requires reciprocity, not entitlement. Machiavelli understood that scarcity enhances value. What is always available is rarely desired. When a man withdraws, he does not punish her. He restores the equilibrium of power that her behavior has disturbed. The man who never withdraws becomes predictable. The man who does so wisely becomes unforgettable. Machiavelli also emphasized the importance of consistency in maintaining authority. Boundaries are meaningless if they change with emotion. The ruler who enforces the law today and ignores it tomorrow invites rebellion. Likewise, a man whose boundaries fluctuate with his mood communicates instability. For a boundary to command respect, it must be absolute. Whether in affection or conflict, the man must remain unwavering. His decisions must reflect principle, not impulse. In this steadiness lies his strength. In this calm lies his power. A woman can test a man's patience, but when she senses that his standards are fixed, she learns to adjust rather than rebel. The art of boundaries and withdrawal is not about domination, but self-preservation. It is the understanding that your peace is your throne, and not everyone deserves entry into it. Machiavelli believed that to maintain control, one must master both presence and absence, knowing when to engage and when to retreat into silence. The ruler who cannot step back loses the ability to rule. The man who cannot detach loses the ability to lead. In every relationship, emotional authority belongs to the one who needs the least, who fears nothing, and who can walk away without bitterness when the balance of respect is broken. Machiavelli's wisdom reminds us that love, like politics, is a domain of power, subtle, emotional, and endlessly strategic. A man's downfall rarely begins with betrayal or heartbreak. It begins the moment he abandons his standards. The toleration of disrespect, the blindness to manipulation, and the fear of solitude all conspire to make him weaker with each silent concession. The 8 unacceptable behaviors we have uncovered are not simply flaws in women. They are tests of a man's strength, his discernment, and his ability to govern himself amid emotions' chaos. To live as Machiavelli would advise is not to live coldly, but consciously. It is to love with eyes open, to give affection without surrendering authority, to forgive without forgetting patterns, and to walk away without hatred when respect is no longer mutual. Power in relationships is not about domination, it is about balance, and balance is preserved only through self-control. A man who knows when to speak, when to act, and when to withdraw cannot be manipulated, because he no longer fears loss. His worth is not defined by acceptance, but by the boundaries he enforces and the dignity he refuses to compromise.